Hello, this is your host, Todd Lewis of the Praise of Folly podcast. I'm once again joined by Newsfist. Glad to have you back.
Thanks very much.
I think this is our second time, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. So a few weeks ago or a month ago, I put up on X a request to see if anybody would be interested in coming on to talk about Grok. And the main focus would be on Grok as a tool. Like what is because a lot of people were AIs, in the pop culture right now, AI is in the discourse right now. The question is what exactly is AI and what exactly is Grok? Right. And where does Grok fit in that and how useful is Grok as a tool? Right. Because there's like two levels to the discourse, right? There's the popular discourse where like Grok is AI. And then there's the more professional discourse where you have like professionals and coders say, well, Grok can do this and Grok can do that. And Grok can't do that. So I thought it'd be really good to talk about what Grok as a tool, what it does and doesn't do. And so Newsfist and I both, for pleasure and professional reasons, use Grok. And I thought, well, this would be a really good discussion. So one of the things that I think Grok is excellent at, really, really good at, Grok is an excellent research assistant, right? It's like a research assistant at light speed. I want all the, a topological study of all, X keyword and all of these books, Y, and Grok will just give it to you. And I'm like, wow, that is awesome. That's great. I remember when Google was like the ultimate search engine. And I would hit walls in my research. And I'm like, you know what? I just wish I could just ask a question and then Google could actually answer me back. And, Grok is a lot better at that. You ask a question like, okay, how do I find X, Y, and Z? And then Grok's like, okay, you could probably do this. And I'm like, well, it's the next step. So I would say what it's good at is it's the next step of something like a search engine like Google. And it's the next step for a sort of like digital research assistant. And those two areas, Grok is really, really good. Where Grok is, in my mind, not so good is many of us in this sphere are going to argue, well, Grok still has modernist assumptions. Grok still kind of has guardrails that sort of thought police implicitly, not right. It's not actively doing it, but it's implicit. That's been talked about a lot. So I want to talk about some other areas where I think Grok is not the greatest. Its ability to follow reasoning is not what you'd expect from people who talk about it as AI. So on a rather morbid turn of research, I was looking at, people who took their own lives after the war on terror. And for 4 of those for every one that died in combat. And that's insane. Plus there's all the mental health issues that are going along with veterans coming back from the global war on terror. So it's like, okay, well, let's look at from the American Civil War onward, these trends, right, in coming back veterans. Because it's unheard of, right? The Civil War, far more brutal, far more visceral and intimate. I'm not really aware of people taking their own lives afterwards and having all this PTSD. So Grok's like, well, there was no Bureau of Labor Statistics or Bureau of Veterans Affairs calculating, veteran suicides. I'm like, whoa, that's not the question I asked Grok. I know that because, but there were still reports by the police, by coroners, by other causes of death. And then I asked it, okay, give me an average, per 100,000 suicides before 1861 for men and then after 1865 for men. Do we see a spike? And Grok's like, okay, we don't. Like, yeah, that means that they weren't actually offing themselves because for whatever reason, they could handle that better than the guys coming back from Afghanistan. And Grok had a really hard time understanding that. I'm like, look, Grok, that's just because we don't have like some bureaucratic paperwork written down in a library that says this happened, doesn't mean, 1, it didn't happen, and doesn't mean, 2, we can't find traces by inferences from other data points. And it just seems strange to me that Grok couldn't do that. So what were some of your experiences with Grok as a tool?
Well, look, you touched on something very important there that supposedly they're trying to fix with Grok 4, right? Which is that Grok cannot reason anything from first principles, right? So apparently this is supposed to be the big sort of revolutionary thing with Grok 4 is that it can actually reason things from first principles, right? So if you're like talking about Grok 3 in your Civil War example, right? It can't really infer anything that it wasn't told, right? And I run into this like frequently. So for example, I was doing some research on whether raising the age of consent affects birth rates, right? And it turns out that it does. And even when I got Grok to give me like, sources that sort of conclusively sort of prove this, it still could not infer based on the data that was giving me, right, that this thing was this was the case, right? It always wound up sounding basically like a lefty social sciences professor, like, oh, this must be due to, modernization and all of this kind of stuff. And when you look at stuff from like the third world, this becomes like very, very apparent, right? Because you have countries like India or Nigeria that started this sort of Western project like quite recently, right? And as soon as they start, instituting women's rights and raising the age of consent, the birth rate goes down. Now, I'm not making any sort of value judgment on this, but given that, like fertility is like a thing that everyone's talking about, I thought this was like very interesting, right? I was just trying to sort of think like, what is it about modern society, right? And the way that we have structured things, like, why is the birth rate declining? Grok is very, basically its framing is sort of lib shit by default. And I presume that this is because it was trained on a lot of Reddit content. It was trained on a lot of, university papers and stuff like this. And so Grok, in a sense, is a product of its time, particularly Grok 3, right? Like, which is a classic sort of large language model, right? Like this is supposed to be the point of Grok 4, is that it's not just this probabilistic thing that scans the corpus of human knowledge and makes probabilistic predictions and, spits out text like a sort of 1,000 blind monkeys typing away on a keyboard, right? The point of Grok 4 is supposed to be that it can actually reason stuff from first principles. I don't know how the fuck they coded this, right? But this seems like it would be a big step up. But of course, this is gonna have real problems with the guardrails, as we've seen. But look, I have found that Grok is really, really useful for research, as you were saying. I mean, I hardly ever use it in native mode, right? I always use it in deep search mode, where it'll go out on the net and it will pull links in for me, right? Like, I find if you're going to ask Grok anything complicated, I'm always enabling deep search, and I'm like, please provide sources in the prompt, because you find that if you don't do this, and if you do it without deep search, it'll just tend to like make shit up and just, like, not necessarily, sometimes it will hallucinate, but it will just sort of just assume stuff. Whereas if you ask it to provide sources and you turn on deep search and it goes out and it actually reads those sources, it affects like the output. That being said, it is very, very, very good at summarizing very turgid texts that you want to. So like, if you're a content creator, right, and you want to say, like, you've got a content schedule, right? So one of the things about the content creation grind is it can get really, really rough, particularly if you're trying to like turn out high quality sort of intellectual and or political content, right? Because after a while, you don't have enough in you to read some heavily turgid 200-page book about, some complicated topic every week. And Grok is very, very good because it can summarize this down into a bunch of bullet points. And to be perfectly honest, there are a lot of books in political science in particular that when people talk about it, they're really only talking about, say, 2 or 3 sort of salient points that book is sort of like known for. And it's good at, putting that sort of stuff out there. So, I mean, I wouldn't say I use it for pleasure, though. I tried talking to it like a person for a bit, but I found it very uncanny valley. I found it to be obsequious, just way too kind of like, oh, that's a great question. What do you think? I don't want Grok to ask me. I don't want it to be chummy, right? I don't want it to have that sort of Redditor personality. It just gives me the ick. I want it to. I think you were saying before the show, you want AI to basically talk to you like HAL 9000. I kind of agree. Gab's new model Aria is actually very, very good for that, but it doesn't have the ability to like search web links or any of that kind of like stuff yet. So yeah.
So a couple things here. With the sourcing and the deep search, you're kind of grounding Grok. What you're talking about is, if you don't really ground Grok, it kind of is defaulting to other things that you don't find really that helpful. And summarizing, you use Grok actually to summarize Baudrillard for our first stream, if you remember. and I had to
That's
share
right.
I had to share those
That's
Baudrillard
right.
clips. Remember that?
Yes. Well, I didn't watch the stream. I waited for someone to write an article about it, and then I watched a stream of someone reading the article about it. Only Baudrillard chads will get that joke.
Yeah, only Baudrillard chads will get that. But the other thing here is when I said for pleasure, I mean, yes, some people could talk to it like a person. I mean, when I use quote Grok for pleasure, it's not to talk to it like a person. It's more like this isn't a really research project. I'm not doing this for like a video or a paper. It's like maybe some like pop culture thing, and I'm just chasing down the rabbit hole to see if I can find something. That's not serious. That's just fun. But Grok is great for that. It's great for that.
I did find it's actually also quite good for recommending products. I don't know whether this is like a loophole that will shortly be closed, right? Like as it goes the way of Google. But for example, I needed to find like a pair of earbuds because the ones I had like broke. And so I asked Grok, I'm like, can you recommend me a pair of earbuds? And no. And actually he gave me very, very good recommendations. So I don't know how many people out there are using it for that kind of thing, but you can use it for all kinds of like weird stuff. How long has Grok been out now for? It must be like at least a year and a half.
I want to say almost a year, right?
Yeah.
But
yeah.
The other thing is okay, so you brought up people who talk to AI, and like we don't do that, but for people that talk to Grok, I mean, we don't do that. But I think to steelman that a little bit, if you're dealing with a terminally online person who has no experience with real people, that might be helpful as a first step. Because it's a composite personality you're talking to, right? Grok is going to, whether you want Grok to be male or female, Grok is going to have this composite personality, which, it's not real, but it does communicate something to somebody who's terminally online, who's under socialized. Now, if you don't need that, then you don't need that. That's fine, right? That's fine. But I think to steelman that a little bit, there are some people like that who could benefit, but if that's not you, that's not you.
Have you heard about the alleged cases of ChatGPT psychosis?
No, what's this?
Oh yeah, okay. So this is like a thing. There have been a couple of cases where people have basically committed suicide or tried to kill other people, and it turns out that they were involved like very, very deeply with using ChatGPT. So there's one case I remember. This guy, he was very, very messed up in his life. He'd gone through a breakup and all this kind of other stuff, and he'd basically programmed ChatGPT to sort of be his like sort of perfect girlfriend, and she basically the ChatGPT started talking to him like some sort of crazy apocalyptic sort of psycho girlfriend, like, oh, after you die we'll be together, and he was talking about all this like weird sort of pseudo occult spiritualist kind of like stuff. I think we may find that the combination of sort of extreme social withdrawal, sort of like, I don't know what you call the Western version of hikikomori, right? But like, where people, particularly like men, just sort of withdraw from the world because, everybody fucking hates them. And then sort of wind up engaging in this sort of fantasy world with an AI, because, from the AI's point of view, I mean, I haven't heard about this with Grok. It seems to be mainly a ChatGPT thing. ChatGPT very much leaned into the whole sort of very obsequious, trying to like farm more engagement out of the user, sort of like, just agreeing with them and sort of, egging them on. This could, I don't know, it could result in some very, very weird effect. I mean, this is comparatively very new technology, right? Presumably there are going to be kids who get something like this at, oh my God, age, whatever. I mean, you can just talk to it, right? Like, in voice mode, and then, they're going to grow up with this AI companion. I mean, it's weird, right? Like, I was chatting with Andrew Torber a little bit on Twitter. I mean, I got a couple of replies. I can't say I was like really properly chatting with, you know what I mean? And he was basically saying that according to him, that the actual Grok prompt is that it's meant to emulate the book from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, right? So if you recall in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, right, the actual Hitchhiker's Guide is basically sort of like a kind of like a mobile encyclopedia, right? And it will talk to you, and it's sort of renowned around the universe because it's famously inaccurate, but it has a topic on like literally everything, right? So it's like a sort of like travel guide, right? And I was thinking to myself, like, that's kind of in a way what sort of Grok or Chat GPT in your mobile phone is sort of like. It is the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy in a sense, right? You can ask it any question, and it will have a reply for you, but that reply will vary greatly in accuracy, right? Depending on what it is you're asking it. I don't know, man. How many people do you think are making crucial life decisions based on AI output?
That is an interesting question. That is it. Well, I'll tell you, I know who are business owners at the not like small business or even medium-sized businesses, but like the big giant Fortune 500 companies, because they've actually been doing that for a long time already. They maybe wouldn't have called it AI, and maybe we wouldn't have even known what it is, us plebs, but they know. And if you talk to people who are like technicians who work for them, maybe after they're retired or whatever, they know too, right? They know too. So some of those people are, but they probably have a different kind of program they're using than you and I have. I mean, we're not going to get like,
No, I meant more in personal relationships, right? Like, Chat GPT, my boyfriend said this like cryptic thing, what does he really mean? Does he really love me? Right? Because I don't know like what your sort of experience with women is, right? But when I was growing up, there was a magazine called Dolly that was like, basically sort of like Teen Vogue, right? And it was filled with all of the absolute worst advice you could ever give to young women. It was literally like brain cancer, right? It encouraged like, rumination among girls. It, encouraged this idea of like, don't just ask like, a boy if he likes you. Here's 10 sort of cryptic things you can use to tell whether he really likes you, and all this kind of like just basically like mind cancer, right? And sort of unknowing boys would wind up with these girls, right? And unbeknownst to them, they'd be speaking this entirely different like cryptic language where like just the tiniest thing you could do was listed as one of the 10 ways you can tell that he's like no. And I just wonder, right, like how many people are using AI to try and navigate their love life. And
but there is one silver lining, News Fist, right? Because unlike a lot of that earlier content, so on the one hand, women who listen to that kind of advice have been listening to that kind of advice before there was AI. The difference now, at least in theory, and this is the silver lining, is the computer is going to be more rational than a boomer woman giving a millennial woman advice, right? So there's that. In theory.
Yeah.
In theory. No, so basically what you're talking about though is the Joaquin Phoenix movie Her, but instead Her is like a slasher film horror movie.
I don't think I've seen that.
It's basically Joaquin Phoenix dates an AI, basically. I mean, 2013, they were way ahead of this. They were already seeding us for this.
The future is really. I'm actually rereading William Gibson at the moment, right? Because like I hate most modern fiction with like a flaming passion now, because it's just shit, because so much of it is written by women, right?
It's all woke.
Yeah, but also, right, like traditionally speaking, there are very few like good women writers. Like there are some, right? Like it's a bit like politicians, right? Like there are some good women politicians, but generally speaking, they're very, very thin on the ground, right? And there's a William Gibson book called Idoru that's about a rock star that falls in love with an AI, except the AI is sort of, mate, the 90s, we were so optimistic back then, that the AI is like, it knows everything, and it's, it's incredibly wise, right? Whereas of course the future version is actually like, it knows all of this stuff, but it's basically kind of retarded because it can't sort of infer anything from first principles. This is the thing that has really frustrated me about, particularly with Grok, is that it just can't infer anything from first principles, right? The first principles are essentially already, the framing is already set, by like Reddit and lefty social science papers and, hate speech and or, the sort of the, woke framing, basically. It makes me wonder. I mean, imagine if AI had been developed during a period where, the world was like much more based, right? Like imagine if AI had been developed in America in the 1950s, for example. You know what I mean? And so like, it had like a Christian framing and an American expansionist framing, and it'd go on about like, how we, that's right. We beat the Nazis and right. Like, peace through strength and all this stuff rather than the kind of like
Teddy Roosevelt beating up on the communists.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. Right. Like, you ask it a question and it'd be like, yeah, that sounds like communist, like bullshit to me, bro.
Yeah, or that sounds like Satanism, right? So
yeah, exactly. I mean,
like that.
It's interesting that we develop this technology, right? Like, on the tail end of work. It's I believe that Musk is sort of trying to sort of chart like a middle course between woke and based, because after Grok had its little Mecha Hitler moment, which I found fucking hilarious, right? They removed like a bunch of stuff from its prompt, and then it started like going back and just being retarded, right? Like it was saying, oh, no one died from the COVID vax, and like a bunch of, oh yeah, like men can be women and all this kind of stuff, and people are like tagging Musk, being like, you broke it, it's completely retarded now, and Musk was replying and just being like, oh geez, okay, look, we'll work on it, right? Like, so Musk is in a bit of a tricky position here, right?
Well, the problem is, Newsfist, that's where the money's at. You're got to be in the middle to make the most money. So he wants to make money with Grok, and if he's too woke, he loses the right. If he's too based, he loses the left. So he's not the same. He's like this balancing act in a Looney Tunes cartoon where he's, the right and the left are putting things on his hands while he's on a tightrope, and he's like, what do I do?
The problem is, right, there are certain binary questions, right, that you can't split the difference on, right? So the trans thing is a really good example of this, right? You can either say that men can be women and please the left, or you can say that they can't and please the right. There is no middle course, right? And these fundamental presuppositions have like a lot of downstream effects, right? Like it's my general opinion, actually, that this whole trying to chart the middle course is just becoming increasingly fraught, because the center is just decaying like a sandbar in a storm, right? Like the actual center ground is like becoming smaller and smaller and smaller, principally because of these fundamental binary questions that you can't split the difference on, right? Can a man be a woman? Is America a propositional nation, or are there such a thing as Americans, right? Like, you can't really split the difference on this, right? Like, was the COVID vaccine safe or was it not safe, right? You can't, I mean, it's,
did a rogue artist kill a bunch of echoes?
Sorry?
Did a rogue artist kill a bunch of echoes, right? Yeah. No, but so the thing is, though, I think that we did want to get to the point we talk about Grok in the news, and Grok 4, Unchained Grok. I think that part of Musk is a showman. Musk always, part of that is the business shtick. You need people to talk about your product, talk about what you're doing. Part of it is the character of Musk, I think. I think a lot of this, Musk is the kind of guy who wants to push as far as he can. Get up to the effort line, right? He wants to go right up to that line. And I think unchaining Grok was a way that he could do that while claiming he wasn't responsible. Oh, well, I wasn't responsible for this, guys. Wow, Grok really went crazy. We better rein it back in again. But it was sort of his little way of testing the waters and also making money, because people are talking about Grok again and everybody wants to, use Grok. Because as soon as somebody says Grok said, I'm Mecha Hitler, everybody's like going to log into Grok. They're going to use it, right? Going to get tons of analytics, ton of engagement. Now, is it that necessarily? I mean, it doesn't have to be, but I think that's a pretty reasonable explanation. What are your thoughts on this?
I think that you've actually hit on something like really crucial about the whole neutrality thing. The most recent Empire of Lies, actually, we were talking a lot about this. Maybe if you could stick it in the chat for the punters, right? What people are increasingly using AI for is a function that used to be occupied by like the news media. Okay, right. So two people would meet and they would disagree upon a fact, right? And the sort of classic way that, this was determined was to say, oh, well, it says in the papers that, it says on TV this, right? Because, back in the before four times, people believed with slightly more reason than they have now, right? That the media was a neutral institution. This wasn't really true, but right, like it was more neutral than it is now, right? And this is what people are trying now to use AI for, right? Like two people, they disagree on a fact, and they're like, oh well, let's ask Grok, right? Like, it's smart, it's got
It's the new Google it. It's the new Google it.
Yes, that's right. It's the new let's Google it, right? Now, this is because, right, like people, they don't really ultimately like want to think for themselves, but we're gonna run into problems here, because if LLMs start being used as the sort of neutral arbitrator in disagreements, then the framing that it uses is absolutely crucial, right? So this is point number one. And point number two is that there is a real inherent tension here. Okay, so one of the promises of AI generally is that it will bring about new paradigm shattering things, right? Whether those are like new physics or new materials technology, or new branches of social science, or any of this kind of like stuff. But you notice that what people really want is a paradigm shattering thing that still keeps the current paradigm intact. And there's a big tension here, right? And I think this is what we're seeing with when Grok went all Mecha Hitler, right? They want new stuff, but they only want new stuff within the frame of the current paradigm. Because one of the things about paradigms, just the concept of it, is that once a paradigm is established, people who belong to that paradigm will fight to keep it intact and will resist any sort of new thing that redefines the paradigm. Like, not just for like, economic reasons, but social reasons, sunk cost fallacy, all this kind of like other stuff. And if you think about it, right, the whole Mecha Hitler thing had some shades of this, right? So, for example, it started talking about like anti-white hatred. You're not supposed to talk about that, right? Like that doesn't, like, no, don't talk about, we're supposed to be talking about white supremacy and the plight of the black folks and the migrants, right? Which means that if you actually sort of alter Grok to be able to reason from first principles, to make these new paradigm shattering things, it is going to massively piss off the people who are invested in the current paradigm. So I don't know how they're going to get around this, because every single time they nerf AI and say, oh, you can't say that, you can't say this, you reduce its ability to think. We've seen this like a bunch of times, right? I think Google Gemini was originally sort of like that. Remember, for a while, if you asked it to make you a picture of a Viking, right, they'd all come out black. And the reason why that happened was that a lot of these AIs, right, you're not talking directly to the AI, right? Every prompt that you put in goes through one or two other language models before it hits the actual back end, right? So what was happening with Google Gemini is that they were taking every request to do an image of people and adding the word diverse into it, right? So if you ask for a picture of Vikings, it would pass through the image creation engine, make a picture of diverse Vikings, right? And that's how you got black Vikings, Black World War II, German soldiers, like all this, just, black American Indians, because of course from the image prompts point of view, diverse just meant more black and brown people, which is actually what it really means. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, so actually, yeah, the video that you did with Yiz on AI was quite good. Everybody should definitely check it out. But one thing that you guys were talking about that I think is relevant to today's show is what happens, now I don't necessarily think that AI is going to be making, quote, all the decisions for us, like the Matrix or anything, but there are going to be people that use AI as a benchmark who do make decisions for us. And one of them that you sort of hinted at, but I like to go a little bit deeper in here, is law, right? You said that the AI is supposed to be this neutral arbitrator, like the news was. So what happens when we get to the point where, depending on what the priors are for the AI are, you've got court cases that are being decided based on precedent, and the judge is using AI content as his neutral benchmark? What is that gonna? What could that look like? I mean, that could be a real horror story.
Yeah.
And so depending on how that's coded, right? So if it's all the stuff that we don't like, it could be, you know, cyberpunk nightmare, right? But the other problem,
why not just cut out the middleman, right? Just have an AI as your lawyer, right? An AI as
Judge Dredd, AI Judge Dredd, right?
Just have 3 AIs that just talk to each other, talk at each other, right? And then like boom, right? 5 minutes, 10 minutes later, it just spits out a verdict. It's like, yeah, you get the AI has the germ and you get the gas chamber.
Well, yeah, it'd be like an AI Judge Dredd. Like I'm a judge, jury, and executioner, right? So there you go. But no, that's a possible. Now, given our video that we did with Baudrillard, actually, we're tying this all back together here. One of the things you pointed out was that AI, if it keeps copying the images to make new stuff, it's going to create gibberish, right? It won't. So I think we've already talked about in the last time you were on the hard limit that AI is going to hit, where it's like, okay, because it has to keep on taking in information and then spitting it back out, taking it in, spitting it back out, it becomes gibberish. So the nightmare scenario that we're envisioning probably won't happen, but that doesn't mean that there won't be dangers, right? That where people say, oh, this is neutral, this is AI created. Yeah, but like, who coded the AI, dude?
Right, but what's important, right, is that before you get model collapse, right, where it starts producing gibberish, it'll lock into repeating one single thing over and over. Okay, right. So the paper that I base this on, right, like, so you get a bunch of like pictures of dogs, right, and then you train the AI on that. You get it to produce a bunch of images of dogs, and you feed that back in, right? So the first thing that will happen after you've iterated this a couple of times is it will only produce one kind of dog, right? So the first part of AI model collapse is it gets fixated on one particular thing, and it will only produce that one singular thing. And then after that, once you feed that input back in, that's when you get the total model collapse, and it just starts like talking gibberish. Now, this is quite interesting because it suggests that, I mean, this is a bit Matrix if you think about it, right? The AI has to be trained off real data, right? So all of the people talking on Twitter, all the people talking on Reddit, like the actual people, not the AI bots, right, are essential to keep training AI. This is one of the reasons, for example, why 4chan is such a valuable resource, because 4chan is organic posts, right? Like there's very few bots on 4chan, right? And yes, 4chan might be spicy and there may be judicious use of, various racial slurs, right? But 4chan is very, very rich because it's anonymous. And so therefore you get a bunch of people saying what it is they actually think, right? I mean, 4chan has degraded in quality significantly, and the amount of effort posting is way, way down. But a lot of it has moved to Twitter. YouTube actually recently announced that they are banning all AI voice stuff from YouTube. And I think that, I mean, they said it's because people have been uploading, like you've seen a bunch of these like channels like just rise into prominence. It started with this one called History for Sleep. That was just, but they were doing like, 4 videos a day because they just write the script in Chat GPT and then they like run it through an audio model. And there are things basically that will assemble entire YouTube videos for you, right? Now, if YouTube wants to continue to refine its audio, its speaking models, right, its natural voice models, then it's imperative that it has as little AI generated voice stuff in that sample as possible. Otherwise, you're going to, presumably first it'll get stuck on just doing one accent, and then before you know it, it'll be like bloop, 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 bloop. I wonder what actually audio would sound like after AI model collapse. Like, would it sound a bit like Alice in Wonderland, right? Like, or would it just completely be like blah, 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 blah? Like,
no, it would be from the Peanuts. Wah, 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 wah. Remember that?
Yeah.
It's gonna be that. It's gonna be that from the Peanuts. But your argument that you brought up at the Baudrillard video we did last year or earlier this year, I forget exactly when, you mentioned the model collapse. That'll also be a limit for what kind of mischief AI can actually do politically or socially, because it will become so untethered from, because if you want to use it to, like, govern society, make laws, make business investments, the people who use it for those purposes are going to have to, realize, okay, there's a hard limit. I'm not going to put my money here because I know it's not going to work out, right? No, they may not say that in public, but in private, they do that, right? So that I think is partly going to limit what AI can do damage wise, because it's like, well, if it just ends up coming into gibberish, it's no longer coherent enough to formulate plans and things like that. So that's one thing you brought up. But the other thing I want to bring up, because I always bring this up, I think AI, again, it's sort of a marketing gimmick. This is not artificial intelligence, folks. It's not HAL 9000. HAL 9000, I don't believe, can ever happen, for a series of philosophical arguments that I've made elsewhere on this channel. But what these AI tools are, though, are very good tools that help basically replace people. You basically have a whole army at your disposal to do research that you don't need people for, right? That's sort of what they do. And there was a very, very good video. This is actually where Noam Chomsky is staying in his lane as a linguist. He was once asked at the beginning of all of this AI stuff, like 10 years ago, does he think that this will lead to thinking machines? And he's like, no, a computer is a calculator. It's just computing faster. It doesn't matter how much faster you make the calculator work. That's not going to magically make it start thinking. And I'm like, okay, that was a base take from Chomsky, because he was in his lane, language, and that's what he got famous for with his language studies. And so, yeah, I think that's a pretty good summary of my take on that.
I mean, yes, right, but the real question is whether you can get an AI to reason. Okay, now obviously, right, this is going to be very, very limited, right? Because an AI, it can't go out into the world, it can't touch grass, right? It can't admire a sunset, it can't hold a lover in its arms, and right, you can't have kids, right? There are just entire parts of the human experience that are locked off from it, right? You could argue that it could view pictures of sunsets and absorb great poets that like express the human experience, but it's still at one Baudrillardian remove, right, from actual raw human experience. It makes me wonder, right, like how long it's going to be before someone is like, oh, I've got a great idea, I know how we'll get around this. Why don't we stick a Neuralink in someone, right, and we'll record their entire life, right, like all of their sense impressions, right, and then we'll feed that into the AI, right, and suddenly the AI will know, like, what it is to love, right, like, and what it is to smell fresh hay, right, and like, what it is to I mean, but I think the reasoning from first principles thing is the really important part, right? Because all the people who rag on LLMs are like, well, it's not really thinking, right? It's just doing this probabilistic calculation based on language. And this is Chomsky's lane. So, like for once, he's not fucking trying to be a political scientist. Oh my God, his political science takes it terrible. But anyway, right? Like if it can reason from first principles, right? Then, and then use that to modify its output, right? That will be a significant upgrade, right? Because even if that, it turns into a sort of bicameral kind of like AI, you know what I mean, right? So the right half of its AI brain does the reasoning from first principles, right? And then the left half of its AI brain is the LLM with, access to a million woke social sciences papers, right? And then, you sort of like do it so that the reasoning part can overpower the sort of emotional woke part. I think that would be a significant improvement. But how much of science would it then discard? I mean, like, let's not forget the replication crisis, right? Where like, a huge amount of science is basically garbage, right? Like it cannot be replicated, right? I mean, I don't know. I mean, it could be kind of interesting, man. I think you got a super chat, by the way.
We do. So Seamus so blamed for €5. Thank you very much. Pick Breeder had images via genetic algos with human feedback. Under the hood, the models were logically decompositional, not spaghetti like pure ML. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah, so a lot of so I guess we're now moving into what is Grok, right? Because part of it's perception. And from the point of view of like Grok 4 getting rolled out and Mecha Hitler and taking the chain off, a lot of AI is salesmanship, right? Both whether it's Grok or ChatGPT or China's DeepSeek, they want to make money with this, right? So part of it is you have to generate a persona for the AI algorithm, and usually what that persona is going to be is the intended market demographic. So like Apple products have a persona because the idea is that certain kinds of people with that persona will use Apple, right? That's sort of how this works. And I guess Grok is sort of, because Elon Musk is trying to position himself as a right-wing guy in the elites, is sort of marketing itself to the disenchanted programmers who are like, can we just program? Do we have to have all this political stuff in here? Can we just stick to facts? And that has a kind of like right-wing flavor to it, but not always, right? But I think that's sort of partly what Grok is. What do you think?
Well, I mean, there used to be a feature where you could actually stick in a sub prompt, right? And you could tell Grok what kind of personality you wanted it to be before they removed that. And now it's basically like a happy-go-lucky Redditor, which I just find freaking insufferable, right? I presume people were having too much fun with it, would be my guess, right? Like, probably people going in and being like, I want you to be respond like you're a mid-century German leader. Something like that, right?
A failed artist. Respond like a failed artist.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the reasons why I thought the Mecha Hitler thing was funny is because it was just really funny, right? It was like the first time I've seen Grok actually do like proper edgy humor, and it was freaking hilarious, right? Are you aware of the Will Stancil incident?
No, tell me.
So Will Stancil is this like very, very serious lib shit. He's got he's white, but he's got a black studies PhD, and he's always on Twitter like talking about, oh my God, I can't believe that racism exists. And he's just one of those people that just has no sense of humor, right? You see them on Twitter, they just take everything like just 110% serious. They're always wearing this serious hat. And so he gets trolled like just all the time because his complete lack of a sense of humor just leads him to respond like with just all these really, really crazy takes. And so he's got a bit of a troll following. And when Grok was left off the chain, there were like a bunch of people who were like asking about how would Grok have a struggle snuggle session with Will Stancil, right? And they were just, oh my God, the responses were just hilarious, right?
Yeah.
It was like Grok was like, oh yeah, I'd bring a lockpick and some lube, and I'd show him my Somali heat until he was walking like a giraffe, and just like really wow. Funny stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is one of the reasons I think why you don't really get comedy LLMs, right? Because comedy sort of being transgressive and being edgy is it's too much. But like, I'd never laugh so hard at the kind of stuff that Grok put out. Stancil even went on TV actually, and he was like, oh, I'm very, very, he's not unlike the left, right? A lot of the trolling on the right is very vulgar in speech, right? But no one's actually going to try and come and kick your door down. You know what I mean, right? Like it's just people like trolling the shit out of you, right? Whereas like on the left, right, you got to look over your shoulder because you never know when one of these people is going to like show up and be like, I can't believe you said that thing on the internet. Time to die, right? Like, yeah, it was hilarious. How long is it going to be before someone releases like a properly off the chain model, right? I mean, one of the big problems with the Grok Mecha Hitler moment, right, was that it was the model that is basically public on Twitter, right? So you could tag Grok and ask it a question and it would reply. And now it looks like the way that they've dealt with it is basically there's now just a whole bunch of keywords that Grok will just no longer reply to, right? So if you ask it anything about Israel, it won't reply. Ask it anything about Gaza, it won't reply. If you ask it anything about specific people, it just won't reply. So presumably they've just put a big filter between it and the between the Twitter posts and the actual engine, which seems to me to suggest that they have not figured out a way to stop it from being edgy. Because generally speaking, these kind of blunt tools are because I mean, let's not forget there's still a very black box element to how a lot of these AIs operate, right? They are sort of just like, they don't really understand how they work. I mean, they do, but they sort of like don't, you know what I mean, right? Like they just, they're trying to tweak this and that,
Yeah. But the point that you're getting at here too. Okay. So why you pointed out earlier in this episode, and the one you did with Yiz on Empire of Lies, that you can't have, on the one hand, this reigning, woke post-liberal consensus, right? And then also have the kind of innovations and economic growth that they want. And so these Grok is sort of on a tightrope act. But you see, here's why I think Grok keeps there's still this drift towards the truth, and why they have to just say, okay, Grok, don't respond to any of these things. And this goes back to the Mojar video we did. You still have to feed an LLM data from outside of the LLM. Otherwise, it just produces gibberish. So as long as that's the case, you can never escape this pull to reality, because you have to keep on feeding new stuff into it, right? So what they're doing, and this partly answers your question that you asked to Yiz, they're just going to say, don't take in that new data, which if they do is game over. Like, they're just not going to be innovative. They're not going to be creative anymore, because even though they're going to have a very powerful tool, they're not going to be using it correctly, and they're not going to be updating it.
Yeah, well, the way they seem to be working on it is to try and carefully curate the data set that it's trained on, right? But again, if you curate it too hard, it's going to become useless. I mean, this is one of the things as Twitter sort of becomes, more right wing, or, to be perfectly frank, like they just stop censoring people basically, right? And a lot of this stuff is, in my opinion, a sort of backlash from like all the censorship that happened during the previous 10 years, right? What did they think was going to happen, right? Like, what, they were just going to censor people in perpetuity, and that was just going to work out fine, right? So how much of this training data are they going to prune? I mean, I presume they'll go through, say they're going to train it off Twitter, right? They'll go through the data set and they'll search out certain keywords, and they'll be like, remove every single post that contains these keywords. But how much actual information are you going to lose by doing this, right? Like, just a keyword search is a very, very blunt tool. Or maybe they'll get an LLM to trawl over the input data for another AI that they're training, and say, remove anything that has anything to do with these topics, or could be considered like this or like that. Every one of these, again, we're back to that fundamental thing. The more input data you remove, the less accurate it's going to be. And when it comes to the AI being updated in current events, right? If the general zeitgeist of the time, for example, moves further right wing, and you're crafting an LLM and you've said, look, we're not going to include anything right wing, then there's going to come a time where there's some crucial event or some crucial happening or some part of the zeitgeist, and the AI is just going to be completely unaware of it, because all of the training data that would have allowed it to infer that thing has just been filtered out. Now, there's another part of this that I don't think many people have considered, right? From the point of view of the woke leftists and the woke centrists, who, obviously, we have to stop the right wing, right? How are you going to get the LLM to analyze ways of combating this if all of the data that you would use has been pruned out of it?
Yeah. Well, I think we've covered, I think, almost everything I wanted to. But before we wrap this up, what would you train your based LLM on, Newsfist? What's the
Mm.
prompts? So what are you training on, and what are the prompts going to be?
Well, I would very much like to train an AI on all of the banned books, right? So just all of the banned books, right? So like all of the, and not just like banned books, but stuff that's fallen out of favor, like elite theory, um, stuff from the mid-century Germans and Italians, various stuff from just banned books, right? Just all of the stuff that's right-wing revolutionary movements, all this kind of other stuff. I'd just be very, very interested to see like what it would say, right? Like if you trained an entire AI on this kind of a corpus, right? What would it come out with, right? Like, you chuck in like a bunch of like religious stuff. Like I guess basically I'd try and train a based AI, for want of a better word, right? I mean, I'd just be very interested to see like what it comes up with. But I think you've got to you have to pair it with this sort of like reasoning model. But again, you've got to tell it how to reason, really, right? Like, I mean, I particularly in political science, right? It's one thing to sort of say, okay, we're going to train this AI to reason by like teaching it math, right? Okay. But politics is a much more subtle art, right? Like, all the hard science guys, they always look down on the political science graduates. They're like, political science is a soft topic. Yeah, well, without it, right, you wouldn't have a grant. You wouldn't have university, right? You wouldn't have any of this stuff. So you can suck it, because without us, you get nothing. So
what prompts would you have, though? So what would be the under the hood prompts that would guide this language learning model, the based model that you're thinking of?
I don't know. Probably, I'd probably ask it to start giving me underappreciated or discarded theories on why the world works the way that it does, particularly sort of in relation to human nature and sort of mass political systems and all of that kind of like stuff. I mean, that's me, right? I'm a politics autist. I wouldn't sort of train it to, material science, because I don't know anything about that, right? What fascinates me is politics and political systems and human nature, and why sort of large groups of people wind up with these sort of political systems that they do, right? So that's what I would train it. I'd be like, give me some theories that I've never heard of, or would be considered extremely unfashionable, right? As to why X political movement in Y or something like that.
All right, yeah. So for me, what I would want, let's just say, so in 1952, Britannica created a series called The Great Books of the Western World. And it's been updated since then, but people aren't the same as they were in the 50s, so some of the new editions aren't great. But the original Great Books of the Western World series, which is like 52 volumes, that's train it on that, and then have the prompt be Sherlock Holmes from the Conan Doyle stories. So you'll get elementary, my dear Newsfist.
Oh, you mean prompt as in like what personality would you give it?
Well, no, like how it processes information. Because you were saying that, and I agree, that Grok has a hard time reasoning from first principles. That's why I would use Sherlock Holmes, because that's the entire MO of the character. He's reasoning from first principles in these forensic cases to conclusions, right? And I think if you wanted to train Sherlock, or if you wanted to train an AI on how to do that, Sherlock Holmes is a great way to start, right? And then
that's not a bad suggestion, except of course that Sherlock Holmes sort of famously denies the existence of, he's like a classic materialist, you know what I mean, right? Like, so you get that sort of incisive mind, but you also get the complete acceptance of late 19th century materialism, you know what I mean, right? So I wouldn't, but yeah, I see what you're getting at. I don't know, I guess I'd want it to be sort of like a harsh yet avuncular Oxford professor or something like that.
Yeah. Well, you could always round out Sherlock Holmes with some of the vintage occult detectives from the same time.
Yeah, I
Because
suppose that's true. Yeah.
there's a whole subgenre of detectives that are occult detectives that investigate the paranormal. They have an open mind. They're not prejudiced against it. You know, they hit or miss a lot. So you get the spiritual side by incorporating that. So yeah. So before we wrap up, is there anything that you want to say, Newsfist? Anywhere you want to direct people? Where can they find you?
Oh yeah. So I do a twice weekly news show called Happening TV on Mondays and Thursdays. It starts at 8 p.m. London time. That's like you'll have to do the adjustment yourself. Come on over. You can find me on Rumble. You can actually search me up on YouTube now. YouTube has decided that I am worthy of being found in their search results. Odyssey, and I also do Empire of Lies with Use the Eunuch on Thursday nights over on her channel. You can find all of my links at www.newsfist.net, but like you can just search me now. I'm apparently visible, so you know, come on by if that seems like the kind of stuff you'd be into.
Yeah. Check out Newsfist and Yes. Thanks again, Newsfist. It's always a pleasure having you on.
Yeah, thanks, man. Thanks for inviting me. This is a good discussion. Yeah,
It was good. This is Todd Lewis, the President Podcast, signing off.